Let's talk Sir Keir Starmer, actually, and speak with Mike Buckley, who is former Labour Party advisor. Mike, poor old Keir. That is what you call a baptism of fire, isn't it? And I'm afraid to say that the polling and approval ratings are backing up the fact that the general public don't seem to think he's doing a very good job. When he came into power, he had net approval rating of 19%. That means 1 in 5 people were pretty much on side and said, yeah, he's doing a good job. That has plummeted to 3%. First of all, do you think he has handled things well? And how does he now go about regaining public trust?
I mean, I wouldn't worry so much about the approval rating because obviously people will be concerned about what they see on their televisions, what they hear on the radio, what they're reading online. And we're all concerned about what's going on in society. I mean, I think in terms of Keir's personal rating and indeed the government's approval ratings, let's see where they are 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 months from now, and people will judge them on their record. At the moment, people are concerned about what's happening and indeed about the fact that it's still going on. But in terms of how Keir is dealing with it, he's dealing with it in the only way that he can. He's giving the police across the country all the support that he can. They've very, very swiftly moved to not just arresting people and putting people on remand, but also convicting people, which will send a strong message to these riots and the rioters that if they engage in this activity, then there will be consequences. And as we know, the police are now busy arresting people and charging people and indeed putting people on trial. And the trials are probably going to go out, through the night as well, whether they've engaged in the violence themselves or whether they've just incited them online as well. So there's a very clear message coming from the police and from government that this behaviour is completely unacceptable, that it will not be tolerated, which is absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, actually, when it comes to inciting the violence online, I mean, that's sort of relatively neo-legislation, isn't it, when it comes to the online safety bill and what sort of powers are there when it comes to how that can be prosecuted. As a former head of the CPS, I'm sure he knows this all too well. And look, I agree with you in a sense that he's got to focus on doing what he needs to do right now to put out the flames, get those riots stopped, bring those to justice who have been perpetrators in what have been horrific scenes happening around the country, and more, of course, predicted still to take place. It'd be good if that didn't happen. But once that is done, once that is dealt with, and I have utmost confidence that we as Brits are going to get over this, actually, that we will be able to have calmer, cooler days ahead. Is he going to be in listening mode? Is he going to realise, do you think, that, yes, there is a disgusting, mobbish, yobbish, hardened, thuggish element to all of this, who have done things that are unspeakable. But there is also out there in the country a huge number of ordinary people who feel like they've not been listened to, and that when those issues aren't dealt with, societal issues, let's say, that there will always be the backdrop, always be the simmering tensions which become fertile ground for the sort of eruptions we have seen to take place.
I mean, we need to draw a very clear distinction between people who maybe have concerns about the way that society is or whether their life is going, their access to a GP, to a dentist, to changes that they see in their community, and the rioters. The actions of the rioters have nothing to do with any of that. It's just people who are going out and they're, for some reason, engaging in the anger, in the actions that they're engaging in. Largely, I suspect, because they feel incited to do so by their friends, or they just feel like there's riots everywhere, so we might as well get involved. But these are people, a lot of whom ought to be behind bars or ought to be dealt with. And thankfully, it's a very small minority of the population, but it is a section of the population that needs to hear a very clear message from authorities. This is not going to be tolerated. There will be consequences. Yeah. They're not pro-British. They're not pro-community. They're not pro any part of our community. They're taking action against anybody from any community, against white people, brown people, of whatever background. This has nothing to do with what they want society to look like, or, in quotes, taking our country back, if you like. Yeah. The thing that worries me more is the fact that 4 million people voted for the Reform Party at the last election. Now, those are people who are responding to the words of Nigel Farage, of Richard Tice, and of people who are, I think, portray a very dark view and an objectionable view about where our society is.
Hold on a minute. You're saying that a party that got the 3rd most votes in a democratic election, and remember, there was a very low turnout for this election, You're saying that those people are dark and they're dangerous. You're saying that people who are worried about immigration and net zero are dark and dangerous.
I'm not saying that the voters are for a minute. No, please don't hear me say that. But with the words that you hear from Nigel Farage, for example, I mean, talking about the fact that we can't move to net zero, I don't need to move to net zero. When you look at the scale of the climate crisis, it's not just wrong. It's actually mad, and it would be completely against the interests of the British people of whatever background, and against the interests of everybody else on the planet as well. I mean, that's just established scientific fact. When it comes to immigration, there's a lot of misinformation put out there, and the basic narrative of your life is bad because immigration is too high is simply not true. People's lives are bad and they're facing challenges because they've had a bad government for 14 years.
I know Richard Tice and I know Nigel Farage extremely well, okay? And I can confidently tell you that these are incredibly patriotic men. They're men with good hearts. They're men who see problems politically, and they're offering to voters what they believe are a set of solutions. And you're telling me that somehow they're evil and that they're dangerous. I don't think there's anything about talking about controlling immigration and questioning how we go about tackling climate change are evil or dangerous things, when it seems to me the majority of people on the street are very worried about these things. They're worried about the pound in their pocket and how we pay for the transition to net zero, something that the Labour Party themselves suddenly realised they couldn't afford to do when they dropped it, when they realised the price tag was way too high. And do you not think that we need a national conversation in this country about immigration, and especially in terms of volumes?
I mean, what we've had in the last few years is a government that has raised rhetoric and raised anger and raised anxiety about immigration, and particularly about the asylum system. We also have a government that has shut down the asylum system. And as we saw last week, Rachel Reeves announced that we've spent over £6 billion public money that we've all paid in tax has gone on paying for hotel bills and gone paying for...
Well, that's okay, because the government's just going to give them houses instead now. I mean, that's not solving the problem.
It's not okay. It's a catastrophic waste of money. It was completely needless. And that only happened because Rishi Sunak refused to process asylum claims. Every other country in the world has people arriving claiming asylum. They process those claims. If they're genuine refugees, they're given refugee status. Then, like anybody else, they need to go get a job and make their own way in the world. And if they're not genuine asylum seekers, then the government of those countries try to send them back. Our government stopped doing that and let the numbers of people just waiting around to have their asylum claim heard rise up to 80,000 or more. That is why that money was spent, and that is why there are lots of people in hotels around this country. It was Rishi Sunak's choice and had nothing to do with the numbers of people approaching this country claiming asylum, which we have a responsibility to do with those people. The new Labour government, they will process those claims. People will be moved out of those hotels, and if they're genuine refugees, they'll go and live their lives. That's absolutely right.
And if they're not, they're going to be deported? They're all going to be sent back if they're not?
I think, I mean, clearly, if there's an ability to return them to the country that they came from or to a safer country, then the government will take that route. There is, of course, the question over what happens when somebody fails their asylum claim, but they can't be returned to their country of origin, either because that country doesn't want to accept them or because it's not safe to do so. And I know that the government needs to come up to a solution, come up with a solution to that problem. And it is a genuine, real problem. Yeah. And I would like to be able to sit here and say, well, I know what to do about it. I don't, and I wish I did. I don't think there's any government in the world that does, really. But that is a problem. But it's only a problem with a certain cohort of people. And as we know, even under the last government, which was hardly favourable towards asylum claims, when they were processing claims, about 2/3 of the claims were accepted as genuine.
Mike, thank you ever so much for coming on the programme. Former Labour Party advisor. I don't take too kindly to people sort of pointing fingers at people I know very well and calling them dark and dangerous. I thought that was wholly unwarranted and frankly irresponsible and reckless, because it's this sort of thing. Oh, you can't incite violence against other people. You can't criticise that person. You can't do that. Oh, but when it comes to politicians you disagree with, it's open season.